Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back from our break. If you guys want to know what's been happening with the channel, go and check out the community comments I have on the channel. You'll figure everything out there. But today we're going to be talking about a much requested video, especially from a close friend of mine, called the Monarch. And honestly, the Monarch is one of my favorite mechs in Lancer as well. Now, the one thing I will say, I do actually like this art. I know my co-host for Table Talk, Glue Boy, absolutely hates this art, and I don't know what's up with the guy, honestly. But I actually genuinely really like this. This is one of the coolest, like, battle style mechs that has a very clear and futuristic kind of design. The one thing about the Monarch that I find just the strangest thing, it's a size 2 mech. Yeah, it's actually a pretty big boy, pretty beefy mech, which is, I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it other than it's harder to find cover because you can just get one of your sides shot off. It's just, I don't know why it's a size 2. Because, like, most of the time, size 2 is actually a good thing. Because, like, with a lot of the defender mechs, it's something that allows you to block more bullets, essentially. But for the Monarch, I don't know if, like, size 2 is intended as a debuff or not. It's just, it's very strange. Also, this is an artillery frame, and probably the premier artillery frame. And if you're not familiar with the game at this point, you're just checking out some of the mechs. Artillery frames are long-range damage dealers, typically using missiles or some kind of launchers that go over cover. One of my favorite playstyles in these kind of games, honestly, if you play Armor Core, like, I love these kind of styles of mechs particularly. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Monarch and see what all the fun is about. So let's go ahead and look at the defensive stats real quick here. So defensively, it's pretty average. It has 1 armor, 8 HP, and 8 evasion, and kind of on the low end of average, but still pretty much average, an 8 of E defense. So right here, it's not bad. It's actually a pretty tanky mech, all things considered, because one armor and 8 HP is actually pretty good, but it's nothing stellar. You know, there's lots of tankier mechs out there. Uh, when we're looking at heat capacity, it's on the upper end of average, but it has a massive sensor range of 15 hexes, which is pretty good. A bonus to tech attack, which is also really good, and a slightly worse repair capacity, a little bit below average repair capacity. Average save, and actually on the faster end of average for speed and less than average system points. So even looking out just at this, we can see here that it's not a very crazy mech other than like its sensor range being as big as it is. With the bonus to tech attack it also has tech options as things it can do in combat. And honestly, it's pretty good at long distance, as you can see with the massive sensor range. Now, the thing that makes it truly unique are its traits and its mounts. And oh, gotta shrink the camera real quick here. There we go. Head was in the way. So, Avenger Silos. Once per round, on critical hit with any ranged weapon, the Monarch may deal 3 explosive damage to a different character of your choice within range 15 and line of sight. This is automatic damage whenever you crit. That's so good. This just makes it where you're always launching missiles all over the place, and some people are just catching stray bullets from you. It's really cool. It's something I really enjoy with the Monarch is it really rewards you for playing at range. And Avenger Silos is just one of those things that is really good. Now, Seeking Payload is also really good. It can use a launcher weapon to attack a character with lock-on condition as if that weapon had Seeking, but it must consume the lock-on during the attack. When it does so, the attack's damage cannot be reduced in any way. That also is really good. Now, it does mean that, honestly, you're going to want to use launcher weapons more often than not, but that's honestly not a bad idea for you. They're already one of the longest range ones. Most of them have arcing, so they go over cover a lot of the time, even though they do give the enemy the benefits of cover regardless. It's it's something that I really think makes the Monarch really cool. It's really fun, and when you're using launchers, when you're shooting missiles at people, the ability to get Seeking is insanely good because Seeking completely ignores cover as the rockets essentially as long as a path can be drawn to the target, they ignore cover and don't require line of sight. I don't know, and I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure. No, yeah, you don't actually need lock on, or you don't need to have vision to consume lock on, just when you're attacking a target. So that being the case, it's pretty good. Long range, nothing can really stop you. And not only that, in addition to the ability to do extra damage, with their Avenger silos, seeking payload also just prevents the damage from being reduced in any way, pretty much ignoring armor and all kinds of stuff. So that's really good. Now it's only upon use of lock on. So on an individual target, at most, you're only doing it one, maybe two times a combat if you're consuming an ally's lock on and uh you're consuming an ally's lock on when you attack, and then you lock on with your second action, and then you use your overcharge to attack again. I'm pretty sure that's the way you can do it. So yeah, it's actually a really good damaging mech. It's very, very good and very solid. Now, if we take a look at the mounts here, and I was made aware, so, for those of you who've been correcting me in my videos, I was getting one of the mounts confused. I actually mentioned this earlier. I don't like the name of the mounts. So, the flex mount is either one main or two auxiliary, and main aux is main and aux weapon or two aux weapons. So, I kept getting flex mount and main aux confused. The naming conventions just don't work for me. But yeah, so oops, what can you do? It's easy enough to find the error, so I'm not going to stress about it too much. But I will acknowledge that I was wrong. So flex mount is still a really good mount, not like the best, but it's better than main mount, which is either one main or one aux weapon. So we have here the standard kind of spread. We have a flex mount, main mount, heavy mount, set up for most use of weapons in the game, which is honestly pretty standard. It's pretty good. Like, it's surprising how the frame traits alone make the Monarch, because everything else about it is not super, like, beyond the sensor range, which I guess is on the, is above normal by far. It's not a very remarkable mech stat wise. Even its mounts are. Though I do gotta say the high penetration missile system, or divine punishment for its active core power, is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'll hide the camera here real quick. So choose any number of targets within range 50. Your target must each succeed an agility save or take a d6 plus 4 explosive damage. They take half damage on a success, and these are self-guiding, so they can reach any target as long as there is a path to do so. This is just an active power that just hits all enemies on the battlefield for a d6 plus 4 or for half. Now, honestly, as far as core systems are concerned, it's actually one of my least favorite in the game. A lot of the other core systems allow you to change up how you play the game. There's something that really affects how the game works. This one is just I attack everyone on the battlefield for an okay amount of damage. A d6 plus 4 is very rarely going to structure out like an enemy frame. And even though the damage potential is massive, like, don't get me wrong, it's powerful. If there's enough enemies on the battlefield, this is the highest damaging ability in the game. Like, not even close. But it doesn't really change how you play the game. It honestly makes the Monarch a very easy mech to utilize, as your biggest thing is just being at range and shooting enemies with missiles. Now, you are a bigger mech, so finding cover is a little bit harder, but even then, it's honestly not bad. And honestly, Monarch really benefits from talents like Ace, which allows you to fly a lot more easier. So yeah, and there's also the Smith Shimano core core bonus. Yeah, core bonus you can get, which allows you to have flight as well. So there's a lot of good ways to utilize this mech, though it's very easy to get caught out because you're getting a little too overzealous with the artillery stuff, and being at massive range, that a mech can just run up and blow you out of the sky or out of cover or whatever. So you do have to be careful, but even then you have a point of armor and 8 HP. So it's a pretty standard mech. Like, honestly, I would say the Monarch here is probably one of the more beginner friendly mechs. Now, I also don't like that they gave him toes. Why'd you give him toes? Why'd you give him grippers on a mech? It's so unnecessary. Anyway, let's go take a look at the rest of the license to see what's going on here. We also have another mech. So I made a big hype about the Monarch. I actually kind of forgot that the Viceroy was also in this license, but the Viceroy is also a pretty cool mech. So the Viceroy is a striker frame, and it kind of takes the same launcher idea, but brings it into a much closer distance. So if you don't know the difference, a artillery frame, like I said before, is a long distance attacker, while the striker is more medium to close range attacker. Now, this one is a size 1, so this one has a lot easier ability to get into cover. And honestly, I think this is very intentional because it's meant to be closer range. It is honestly meant to avoid, taking damage because it doesn't have the same benefit as the Monarch of being as far. And I actually really like this one, though, again, we still got toes here. Man, just quit giving your mechs toes. It's very strange. I also love it's a very regal looking mech. I love the medals and everything like that. The Viceroy very much lives up to its kind of military political kind of title. And this one is obviously much smaller. It's a size 1. So you can see an actual person in this image here. Very, very cool. I also really like this particular launcher that we have here. But let's go ahead and take a look at its stats. Okay, so very similar to the Monarch, we have standard defensive traits: 1 armor, 8 HP, 8 evasion, and 8 E defense. It's average. It's very average. Now, its heat capacity is also on the higher end of average. Its sensor range is lower than the Monarch set, which makes sense. This is a much closer range mech. This one doesn't get a bonus to tech attack, but it does have a slightly higher, it has 1 point higher of repair capacity, so it can take some more damage than the Monarch can, and it has a higher save target. So that being the case, this one is more prone to using abilities that cause the enemies to make saves. Now we have the same speed and same system points, which means it's a little bit fast, but has not a lot of system points to work with innately. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the traits. We have the near threat targeting processor. So like I said, this is very much a close quarter version of the Monarch. This one especially, it treats all launcher weapons as if they are CQB or close quarter combat weapons with a threat of 3. So the big point of this one is to move up close to the enemy, maybe behind cover, and just hold a hallway or something so that enemies that try to come in will get shot by a rocket launcher there, which is pretty cool, especially with the vigilant omnidirectional launchers. So once per round on critical hits, similar to how the Monarch works, the Viceroy may immediately deal 2 explosive damage to all characters of its choice within range 3 of itself and knock them back 1 space. Now, this was a little strange. You would almost think that this is more of like a defender ability, right? And you could probably turn the Viceroy into a defender style mech pretty easy. Not as big of a defender as some of the other ones, especially since you don't have the Guardian trait, but you can actually pick up the Guardian trait through the talents. So, this one's actually not a terrible, like, pseudo Guardian mech just for this ability alone. It does make you want to be in close to a bunch of enemies, which is somewhat difficult. But regardless, it's only based on the critical hit anyway, so it's a lot more risk than reward, in my opinion, than what the Monarch has when it's usually firing from a massive distance away. Now, its pressure plating is insanely good because it makes it resistant to explosive damage. So you can feel free to rocket the ground next to you like you would in Halo back in the day. And you know what? You are less likely to die than everyone else around you, probably. So yeah, this is a very interesting setup. It honestly makes you want to go in with a rocket launcher at like close quarters combat range, 3 hexes, and just go to town, which is pretty cool. Now, this has slightly worse mounts than the Monarch, but it does kind of make sense. It has an aux mount, a flex mount, and a heavy mount. So the aux mount, I'm going to double check here because I'm usually dumb. Yeah, so you can hold 2 aux weapons. This one is either a main or 2 aux, and this is a heavy mount. I don't know if you want to go like double aux mount. I'd have to take a look. There might be a missile that's an aux missile here, which might be the one you want to go for, but it'd probably be just better off taking a normal, like, big explosive one, like a heavy one, into close range, especially because even if it does like burst, you have pressure plating, so you can ignore some of the damage. So having a heavier weapon at close range, especially with the omnidirectional launchers, makes more sense to me. Granted, of course, you have multiple mounts. But a heavy mount and a main mount probably will work better, give you a good mix of damage, range, whatever. But let's go ahead and take a look at the Tengu assisted missile tube. So I'm gonna go ahead and have my camera again here. The Heaven's Downpour. Man, these are such great names. Center a burst 3 missile swarm on yourself. Hostile characters in the area must make a hull save or take a d6 plus 3 explosive damage, which is a little bit less than the Monarch by 1 point on the bonus there. And they're knocked prone. So 1 point difference in damage for knocked prone, I think, is super worth. On a successful save, they take half damage and remain standing. You may consume an affected character's lock on to make them automatically fail the save. And before or after taking this action, you may fly up to your speed, ignoring engagement and reactions. You must end this movement on solid ground or begin falling. So, overall, Heaven's Downpour here is insanely cool. Now, this is a burst 3 missile swarm on yourself. You essentially kind of do Farah or Pyrrha or whatever her name is from Overwatch. I don't play Overwatch. Where she kind of does her missile swarm. It's just in a short burst around her in all directions. And because you can automatically fly up to your speed, you can just fly up to a bunch of flying carriers and just blow them all up, which is super cool. And if any of them have lock on, you can consume that lock on to make it so they are guaranteed to take the d6 plus 3 damage. So, really cool. And again, it really makes the Viceroy close range. Now, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the equipment here, and we're going to see how well the Viceroy works along with the Monarch's essentially base kit. All right, so first starting off, we have the Sharanga missiles. So I love weapons in the first rank. That means just getting the first rank, getting towards your Monarch when you're beginning the game, you get a pretty good missile launcher. Now, this is a main launcher here, so, pretty typical. Has a range of 15, which is pretty massive. It does 3 explosive damage straight, so it's honestly better than a lot of standard weapons because it just does 5 damage. Now, it doesn't have a good high damage, but also just doesn't do a low damage either. So I really like this one, even though there are better, there's better main weapons you can use, especially at long range. I think this one's good, and because it's a launcher, there's all kinds of things you can do with launcher, especially if you're using the Monarch, so it works perfectly well. Now, the additional benefit and why I especially like this one is this weapon can attack 2 targets at a time. So yeah, even though it does a little bit less damage than other main weapons per target, it does 2 targets as long as they're within line of sight. Now, there's also an arcing weapon, so you can lob this over obstacles, meaning the attacks do not require a line of sight. So this does allow you to, but they do get the benefits of cover if there's cover between you and them. So that is something that is important to mention. But yeah, so the Sharanga missiles are really, really good. And it's just a main launcher. You can, if you have the standard weapon spread, if you have a main and a heavy mount, you actually even with the flex mount with the Monarch could technically have 3 sets of Sharanga missiles if they really want to. I don't know why you would do 3 sets, but if for a lot of mechs, you could easily do 2 Ox weapons with your flex mount and a main Sharanga missile, and your heavy mount couldn't be another Sharanga missiles, so that when you full barrage, you can shoot both of those at the same time while having some good auxiliary weapons for like Overwatch, for instance. So yeah, I really like this. And if you had 2, I mean, when you full barrage, you can hit 4 targets, potentially dealing up to 12 explosive damage around. That's insanely good. Also here at level 1, or at rank 1, we have the Javelin rockets, which is a 2-system rocket that is honestly pretty cool. Though I do think this one's a bit of a 5-head style of system. You need to be really good with it in order to utilize it. So you choose 3 spaces that have nothing in them within a range of 15 and line of sight and aren't adjacent to each other, so you can't create a line. All characters know which spaces you have chosen, so in typical video game fashion, a red light appears in the zone, so enemies know to avoid the AoE marker. And you fire a volley of auto-targeting rockets that fly into the air, and at the start of your next turn, when a character moves into or passes above a chosen space, until the start of your next turn, when a character moves into the space or above it up to, I think, 10 spaces up, They are hit by the rocket, taking 3 kinetic damage. Each space can be triggered once, and then the effect disappears on that space. So the major benefit of javelin rockets is they are zoning tools. You, as long as you have line of sight, you can go and you can drop them in places so that enemies, if they want to go through that hex, they have to take the missile. And there's no attack, no nothing, nothing. They just take 3 kinetic damage. And 3 kinetic damage, I mean, a lot of enemies will have 1, maybe 2 armor, rarely 3. So most enemies are going to be taking some flak to do this. And because you get 3 spaces, this is actually something you can do to kind of cover a wide number of different access points to a certain area. This is pretty good, though I will say that using this well, especially when the enemies know where the zones are. I mean, an enemy is, unless there's a specific objective they need to take right away, they're just going to let the missiles, go off without triggering them. They can wait a turn or whatever. This does stall the enemy, which can be helpful, but it's something that you need to be very careful of when you're using the javelin rockets. This is not an attacking ability. This is a pure control ability. And honestly, because of that, I would actually highly recommend any characters who are playing control style mechs to very much consider the javelin rockets. These are really good. It's a good way to add some extra damage to your controlling and zoning abilities. All right, so we're on to rank 2 here. Along with the Monarch and Viceroy, we have the Gandiva missiles, which is a heavy launcher, a really, really cool one. And again, I love getting weapons in these licenses. So this one is a 15 range, does a d6 plus 3 energy damage, which is really good because a lot of launchers typically do explosive. So this is a launcher that does a different type of damage, though this one does require a system point. So both the Viceroy and the Monarch don't have a ton of points to really work around with. So that being the case, something to consider, but I do really like this one. Now, this one is accurate, which is insanely good for both of the frames because they both do something on crit. This one's also seeking, as I mentioned before with the Monarch. Seeking is really good. You don't need to necessarily have line of sight in order to use it, and they're smart. So this one targets the enemy's E defense rather than its normal evasion, which can be insanely good. Now, another thing I'll mention as well is while the Sharanga is more beneficial to the Monarch rather than the Viceroy, as I mean, it still works for the Viceroy, don't get me wrong. With the Viceroy and the Sharanga missiles, you're never going to use the ability to hit 2 frames with Overwatch because you're only targeting the triggering enemy. This one, though, doesn't have that same kind of problem. And it's a heavy launcher that you can fire at close range. So this one can be used with Overwatch, which is actually pretty cool. It's actually pretty insane in the hands of the Viceroy. And because it's seeking and smart, it's something that if you're using it for Overwatch, the smart is actually insanely good because a lot of upfront mechs don't have a lot of good E defense. So this punishes heavily mechs that are more focused on coming up and running into you. Now, this is also really good for the Monarch, obviously, because it gives you extra accuracy, which, I mean, that's good for either mech, but it's seeking and smart. It just gives you a really good heavy launcher to use with your main Sharanga or whatever you're going about. So overall, I really, really like the Gandiva missiles. It's insanely good. It's an insanely powerful weapon, though it does come at an additional system point cost, which a lot of mechs might not have the ability to pick up. So either way, for these mechs frames particularly, I really like this particular weapon. All right, we also have a weapon mod here at rank 2, which is insanely good. Now it's 2 points, but it adds 5 to the range of your weapon. Now this only applies to launchers and cannons, but it can be applied to any launcher and cannon of any size. So that's all it does. And honestly, pretty good. Now, obviously for the Viceroy, this is not necessarily a good one. This doesn't do anything for the Viceroy's general kit of wanting to be up close and personal, but for the Monarch, this is a very good one. I mean, oh, hey, normally I'm attacking at range 15, but now I'm attacking at range 20. This one definitely makes flight also a much better choice, as it's a lot easier to gain more distance from enemies. So that being the case, Stabilizer mod is an insanely good pickup, and not just for these frames. any frame that uses range weapons is going to want to pick up stabilizer mod. So if you're using any artillery mech, any long distance range mech, you're probably going to want to put a couple of ranks into Monarch just for stabilizer mod because it's just really good. All right, so we're getting to the last rank here. And so before we get to this part, as always, if you're enjoying this content and you want more people to see this content, leave a like. It really helps the video out. And obviously subscribe so that you're more likely to see my videos as they come up. We also have a Discord linked in the description if you want to get a notification every time the channel goes live. So that being the case, hope y'all enjoy. Let's go ahead and get on to the Panaka missiles. So the Panaka missiles are a super heavy launcher, which means that you need to fire it at the beginning of your turn, and it uses a full barrage. So that's something to keep in mind. But the Panaka missiles have a range of 20, possibly 25, and it has a blast of 1, and it does 2d6 explosive damage. Now, honestly, damage-wise, this doesn't look too good compared to the Gandiva. Gandiva does a d6 plus 3. It just seems more consistent, and it does energy damage, unlike a lot of other ones. But this one has a special feature. So attacks with this weapon create up to 2 blast 1 areas, which cannot overlap. You may also delay the impact of the attacks made with this weapon. Choose the target areas which become visible to all characters. The missiles land at the end of the next round after all characters have acted, and deal 3d6 explosive damage instead of 2d6, but you become slowed until the start of your next turn. Until the end of your next turn. My bad. So this is also an arcing weapon, and it does 2 heat to yourself. It has the benefit of the Sharonga, right? Where it can go and it hits 2 blast 1 areas, which can hit a lot of targets depending on how the battle is spread out. But at minimum, you're hitting 2 targets. So 2 targets for 2d6 damage each. Pretty good. And because of blast, it's really easy to get around cover because all you have to do is position your shot where they wouldn't benefit from cover, but the blast could still potentially hit them, and you're good to go. It has a massive range. I am not a super big fan of this particular weapon though, in all honesty. It just seems like it has a lot of drawbacks, and I mean, the whole being able to delay the missiles to add an additional d6 of damage. It's a possible zoning tool, but it also slows you in addition. Like, I don't know. As a super heavy weapon, this feels like it doesn't have the same amount of punch that a lot of other weapons does. But I'm not going to say that it's not a good weapon. And considering it's not a loading weapon either, so you can fire this every round as long as you don't have anything in particular planned for the beginning of your turns, it's honestly not too bad. I think this is okay, but for taking up multiple weapon slots on our mechs, and because our mechs are better utilizing like main launchers or even heavy launchers, the super heavy launcher is just not a particular good one to me. But this might be good on something like the Barbados, that is a much bigger range, longer, big boom style of mech. So I don't know. Honestly, the Panaka missiles, not quite doing it for me, but I do like that they exist at the very least. I'm sure there's an interesting playstyle using them. And last but not least, we have the Talak, or Tlak, I don't know how to say this one, class NHP. So I love NHPs. They're really, really fun, narratively speaking, but in-game as well. So as a protocol, you can do the Talak protocol. It can rapidly fire and retarget your weapons far faster than you can even think. You become immobilized until the start of your next turn, but during this time, you may re-roll each missed melee or range attack roll once, choosing a new target with the attack's range. If the attack was part of an area effect, it must target a character in the same area. Any given target can't be hit more than once as a part of the same action. So this just allows you, as a protocol, to re-roll all your strikes. Now, you are immobilized while doing this, but if you're a long-range launcher, like launcher artillery mech, that probably is not a huge downside for you. You probably weren't planning on moving anyway. So this does give you some really good ability to get around some things. Now, activating this system will give you 2 heat. So that's something to keep in mind. Every time you activate this protocol, you are at risk of overheating your systems, especially since your heating is not super big. Though I will say, honestly, kind of worth it. You don't have a lot of things that consume heat anyway. So there's not a big downside to that. Now, immobilize is the biggest part. Being able to re-roll your attacks, especially with both the Viceroy and the Monarch having abilities based on crits, this is pretty good. And this protocol can be used even with melee weapons. If you're something like a Blackbeard, for instance, who has an enemy roped up against you and you're just smacking down on it, like rather than having a berserking style of NHP, why not have one that just rerolls your attacks for you? Now, obviously, it has to be a different target, but Blackbeard, you can hook up a bunch of enemies and bring them to you, so you're not going to be at a miss for targets. I do like this particular NHP, and because it's an AI, it can take over your mech whenever it needs to. So, yeah, overall, I think this particular NHP is pretty good. Not very exciting, and it's 3 points, but most of them are 2 to 3 points. So I don't know. I think this one is good, but it's not. It doesn't have a big wow factor for me. But it works really well with the Monarch and probably the Viceroy as well. Considering that doing a lot of your area damage stuff, you're gonna have multiple targets around you, hopefully. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the Monarch slash Viceroy license here. Honestly, one of my top 5 frames. It's really cool. I'll probably do a video on my top 5 frames and like my favorite builds for them. So look out for that. But yeah, we are done with the Monarch. This video is a little bit long. These double frame videos tend to be a little bit on the long side. Next up, we are looking at the Manticore, which is going to be really fun. Manticore is a very fun frame that is the energy frame. This one, if you like energy damage, this is the frame for you. So if you really like that, stay tuned. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.